Excuse me, what are you doing in the cardiac unit?
I'm Dr. Foster. I'm checking on my post-op patients.
At 11 p.m. in jeans and a hoodie? I don't think so.
I got called in for an emergency. Patient had complications from this morning's surgery. Show me your hospital badge.
It's right here on my jacket. Dr. Vincent Foster, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery.
That could be anyone's badge. Step away from the patient rooms. You're preventing a doctor from treating his patients. Do you understand what you're doing?
A security guard with barely 3 months of training was about to make the most expensive mistake of his career. Dr. Vincent Foster wasn't just any doctor. He was the man who'd saved over 2,000 lives and built the hospital's cardiac program into a nationally recognized center of excellence. But Peter Evans saw a black man in casual clothes and decided he knew better than the hospital's own ID system. Quick pause. I love seeing how global our community is getting. Let me know in the comments, which part of the world are you tuning in from today? Also, if you value independent storytelling that digs deeper for the truth, please hit that subscribe button. Your support is the only way we can keep exposing these untold stories. 40 minutes earlier, Dr. Vincent Foster had been settling into his favorite chair at home, finally unwinding after a 14-hour day at Metropolitan General Hospital. At 42 years old, he was the youngest department head in the hospital's 50-year history, a position he'd earned through relentless dedication and surgical skill that bordered on the miraculous. His colleagues called him the miracle worker. His patients called him a lifesaver. Hospital administrators called him invaluable. But none of those titles would matter to Peter Evans. Foster's phone buzzed at 10:20 p.m. The caller ID showed the hospital's cardiac ICU. In his line of work, late-night calls meant one thing: someone's life was hanging in the balance. He answered on the second ring. Dr. Foster, this is Patricia Coleman in cardiac ICU. I'm sorry to call so late, but we have a situation with your patient from this morning. Patricia Coleman was the night supervisor for the cardiac unit, a nurse with 18 years of experience who didn't panic easily. If she was calling at 10 p.m., it was serious. Which patient, Patricia? Michael Rodriguez, the 45-year-old, triple bypass. This morning, his vitals are deteriorating, blood pressure dropping, irregular heart rhythm. I think we might have a post-operative complication. Foster's mind immediately shifted into emergency mode. Rodriguez had been a complex case, extensive blockages requiring delicate surgical intervention. Post-operative complications after major cardiac surgery could be fatal within hours if not addressed properly. What are his numbers? Foster asked, already reaching for his keys and jacket. DP is 90/50 and falling. Heart rate irregular, ranging from 110 to 140. EKG shows some concerning changes. I'm on my way. Start him on dopamine for blood pressure support and get me a stat cardiology workup. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Foster grabbed his hospital ID badge, clipped it to his hoodie, and headed for the door. In his rush to get to the hospital, he didn't change out of his casual clothes, dark jeans, sneakers, and the Howard University hoodie his daughter had given him for Father's Day. In 15 years of emergency calls, what he wore had never mattered. Saving lives was about skill and knowledge, not appearance. The drive to Metropolitan General took 18 minutes through empty downtown streets. Foster's mind was focused entirely on his patient. Rodriguez was a father of 3, a construction worker who'd suffered his heart attack while building a playground for his local community center. Foster had spent 4 hours that morning carefully bypassing blocked arteries, giving Rodriguez a chance at watching his children graduate college. Now something was going wrong. Metropolitan General Hospital rose 12 stories into the Seattle night sky, its windows glowing with the constant activity of life and death medicine practiced 24 hours a day. Foster had walked through these doors thousands of times over his 15-year career. He built the cardiac program from a struggling department into a nationally recognized center of excellence. He performed over 2,000 successful heart surgeries. He'd saved more lives than most doctors see in their entire careers. Foster badged into the main entrance at 10:42 p.m. The lobby was quiet except for a few visitors and the overnight staff. He headed directly for the elevators that would take him to the cardiac unit on the 7th floor. His mind was entirely focused on Rodriguez. What could be causing the complications, what surgical interventions might be necessary, how quickly he could stabilize the patient. The elevator dinged open on the 7th floor. Foster stepped out and turned left toward the cardiac ICU, his sneakers silent on the polished hospital floors. The familiar sounds of nighttime hospital activity surrounded him. The quiet beeping of monitors, the soft conversations of nursing staff, the distant hum of life support equipment keeping patients alive. He'd made this walk thousands of times before. Same hospital, same badge, same access credentials, same reputation as one of the most skilled heart surgeons in the Pacific Northwest. But tonight would be different. Tonight, Peter Evans was working his shift in hospital security. Evans had been hired 3 months earlier as part of a security company's contract with Metropolitan General. His previous experience included 2 years as a mall security guard and 6 months working overnight shifts at an office building. His training for hospital security had consisted of a 1-week orientation covering basic procedures and emergency protocols. What it hadn't covered was how to distinguish between legitimate medical staff and potential intruders, especially when those staff members didn't match his preconceived notions of what doctors should look like. At 10:45 p.m., Evans was completing his routine patrol of the hospital's upper floors when he saw a black man in casual clothes walking purposefully toward the cardiac unit. In Evans's 3 months on the job, he'd never seen this person before. The man was wearing jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie, not the business casual attire. Evans associated with doctors making late-night rounds. Something didn't seem right. Evans had been instructed to challenge anyone who appeared out of place, especially in sensitive areas like the cardiac unit, where expensive equipment and vulnerable patients created security concerns. He'd been told that real doctors typically announced themselves to nursing staff and wore professional attire, even for emergency calls. This man was walking with confidence toward patient rooms without checking in at the nurses' station. What Evans didn't know was that Dr. Foster was one of the most recognizable physicians in the hospital. The night nursing staff knew him by sight. The cardiac unit was essentially his second home. He'd designed the layout, selected the equipment, and trained half the staff currently working. He didn't need to announce himself because this was his department. But Evans saw a black man in casual clothes and decided to intervene. "Excuse me, what are you doing in the cardiac unit?" And with that single question, Peter Evans had just confronted the man responsible for saving more lives than any other physician in the hospital's history. He just questioned the credentials of the doctor who'd built the cardiac program from nothing into a world-class facility. He just demanded identification from the physician rushing to prevent a patient's death. Dr. Foster turned toward the voice, already recognizing that this was about to become a problem. In 15 years of practicing medicine, he'd learned to identify the tone that meant someone was challenging his right to be where he belonged. He'd hoped those days were behind him, especially in the hospital where his reputation preceded him, and his skills spoke louder than any assumptions about what a doctor should look like. But Peter Evans hadn't read Foster's reputation. He hadn't researched the department's leadership. He'd simply seen a black man in casual clothes and decided he didn't belong in the cardiac unit of Metropolitan General Hospital. The confrontation was about to begin, and Michael Rodriguez's life hung in the balance. Dr. Foster reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his hospital ID badge, holding it at eye level where Evans could clearly see it. The badge featured Foster's photograph, his name in bold letters, and his title, Vincent Foster, MD, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. Below that, his department affiliation and employee number were printed in official hospital formatting. "Here's my badge, as requested. Dr. Vincent Foster, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery. I've worked here for 15 years and I have a patient in critical condition who needs immediate attention." Evans squinted at the badge but didn't move closer to examine it properly. From 3 feet away, in the fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridor, he could see it was an official Metropolitan General badge, but his mind had already decided what he was looking at. That could be stolen or fake. Anyone can print a badge that looks real. Foster felt his patience beginning to wear thin, but kept his voice professional. Every minute he spent arguing with security was another minute that Rodriguez's condition could deteriorate. "Officer Evans," Foster said, reading the name tag on the man's uniform, "this badge has a magnetic stripe, a holographic seal, and a chip that grants me access to restricted areas of this hospital. It's not something you can fake at Kinko's. More importantly, I have a patient who suffered complications after major heart surgery this morning. Every minute we waste here is a minute that could cost him his life." Evans shook his head. "I don't buy it. Real doctors don't show up at midnight dressed like they're going to a basketball game. They wear suits, ties, professional clothes. Real doctors wear whatever they have on when they get an emergency call at home. Would you prefer I stop to change into a 3-piece suit while my patient goes into cardiac arrest? I prefer you tell me the truth about who you really are." Foster pulled out his cell phone. "Fine. Call the cardiac ICU. Extension 7429. Ask for Patricia Coleman, the night supervisor. She's the one who called me. She'll verify who I am. Evans didn't reach for his radio. Anyone can memorize extension numbers. That doesn't prove anything. Down the hall, Nurse Patricia Coleman emerged from Rodriguez's room with a worried expression. She'd been monitoring his condition closely since calling Dr. Foster, and his vitals were continuing to decline. Blood pressure had dropped to 85/45, and his heart rhythm was becoming increasingly irregular. She spotted Foster in the corridor and hurried toward him, relief visible on her face. But then she noticed Evans blocking Foster's path and realized what was happening. Dr. Foster, thank God you're here. We need you in room 7C immediately. Rodriguez, she stopped mid-sentence when she saw Evans step between her and Foster. Ma'am, do you know this individual? Evans asked Coleman. Coleman stared at Evans in disbelief. Know him? That's Dr. Vincent Foster, our department chief. He's the surgeon who operated on Mr. Rodriguez this morning. How do I know you're not both part of some scam? Coleman's expression shifted from disbelief to anger. A scam? I've been a nurse here for 18 years. Dr. Foster has been my supervisor for the last 8. We have a patient in cardiac distress, and you're preventing his doctor from treating him. Evans remained unmoved. I'm supposed to verify credentials before allowing access to sensitive areas. This man doesn't look like a department chief. What exactly does a department chief look like? Foster asked, his voice carrying an edge of controlled anger. Professional, older, more established. Foster understood exactly what Evans meant, even if the security guard wasn't saying it directly. In Evans' mind, a black man in his early 40s wearing casual clothes couldn't possibly be the head of a major hospital department. The assumption was as clear as it was wrong. Meanwhile, Coleman's frustration was reaching a breaking point. Dr. Foster performed the Norwood procedure on a 2-day-old baby last month. He's done more heart transplants than any surgeon in the Pacific Northwest. He literally wrote the protocols we use for post-operative cardiac care. And you're questioning his credentials because he's wearing a hoodie? Evans looked uncertain for the first time, but his pride prevented him from backing down. Anyone can memorize medical terminology. I've watched Grey's Anatomy. Grey's Anatomy? Coleman repeated incredulously. You're comparing a television show to 15 years of medical training and practice? Foster's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and his expression darkened. Patricia, what's Rodriguez's current status? Blood pressure is 80/40. Heart rate is erratic. We started the dopamine drip, but he's not responding as well as we'd hoped. Foster turned to Evans with barely contained urgency. Do you understand what's happening here? A 45-year-old father of 3 is going into shock from post-operative complications. His blood pressure is dropping. His heart is failing. I'm the surgeon who operated on him this morning, and I'm the only person in this hospital at midnight who can save his life. And you're preventing me from reaching him because you don't like my wardrobe choices. Evans crossed his arms. If you're really a doctor, you can wait for proper verification through official channels. Official channels? Foster's professional composure finally cracked. The official channel is the ID badge you're refusing to accept, verified by the nurse you're choosing not to believe, for the patient whose life you're putting at risk. Coleman stepped forward. Officer Evans, I'm going to ask you once more to step aside. Dr. Foster needs to examine his patient immediately. And I'm telling you that this person doesn't have proper authorization to access patient care areas. Foster pulled out his cell phone again. I'm calling hospital administration. This has gone far enough. Go ahead, Evans said confidently. Administration will back me up. Security protocols are security protocols. What Evans didn't realize was that hospital administration would indeed back someone up in this situation, but it wouldn't be him. Metropolitan General's administration was acutely aware of Dr. Foster's value to the hospital. His cardiac surgery program generated over $30 million annually in revenue. His reputation attracted patients from across the country. His research had earned the hospital national recognition and federal research grants. More importantly, Evans didn't understand the legal liability he was creating. By preventing a physician from treating a patient in medical distress, he was potentially exposing the hospital to malpractice claims, wrongful death lawsuits, and regulatory violations that could cost millions of dollars in settlements and fines. As Foster dialed the hospital administrator's emergency number, Coleman made a decision. Dr. Foster, I'm going to escort you to your patient. Officer Evans, you can file whatever report you want, but I won't let you prevent medical care. Evans stepped directly in front of Coleman. Ma'am, You're not authorized to override security protocols. Actually, Foster said, ending his call, she's authorized to ensure patient safety, which supersedes your security concerns. And hospital administration is sending a supervisor down here immediately to resolve this situation. Evan's confidence wavered slightly. A supervisor, the night administrator, the head of security, and probably the chief medical officer. They tend to take notice when someone prevents emergency medical care. The truth was becoming harder for Evans to ignore. The nurse knew Foster by name and title. Foster knew hospital procedures and protocol. His ID badge was clearly legitimate. His medical knowledge was evident in every word he spoke about the patient's condition. The phone calls he was making were going through immediately, suggesting genuine hospital connections. But Evans had already committed to his position, and backing down would mean admitting he'd made a serious error in judgment. It would mean acknowledging that his assumptions about what a doctor should look like had potentially endangered a patient's life. So instead of stepping aside, Evans doubled down on his mistake. I don't care who's coming down here. This person is not properly authorized to access patient care areas. Foster looked at his phone as another text message arrived from the ICU. Rodriguez's blood pressure had dropped to 75/35. Time was running out, and Peter Evans was about to learn exactly how expensive racial assumptions could be. The elevator dinged open at 11:02 p.m., and Robert Hayes stepped out with the urgent stride of a man who'd been awakened by a call that could end careers. As Metropolitan General's night administrator, Hayes had dealt with his share of emergencies, but preventing a department chief from treating a patient was a new level of crisis. Hayes was followed by Marcus Turner, the head of hospital security, a 20-year veteran who'd worked with Dr. Foster on dozens of emergency cases. Turner's expression was already one of barely contained anger. He'd been briefed on the situation during the elevator ride, and he knew exactly how serious this had become. "What the hell is going on here?" Hayes demanded as he approached the group. Evans straightened up, confident that administration would support his security protocols. "Sir, I detained an unauthorized individual attempting to access the cardiac unit. He's impersonating medical staff." Turner stared at Evans in disbelief. "Impersonating medical staff? That's Dr. Vincent Foster. You idiot. He's the chief of cardiothoracic surgery." "Anyone can claim to be a doctor," Evans replied, his confidence beginning to waver. Hayes pulled out his phone and opened the hospital staff directory, scrolling to Foster's profile. The photograph matched perfectly. The credentials were undeniable. Hayes turned the phone toward Evans, his voice cold with fury. "This is Dr. Vincent Foster. 15 years of service, over 2,000 successful surgeries, department chief for 8 years, the man who saved more lives in this hospital than any other physician." Evans looked at the phone, then at Foster, then back at the phone. The resemblance was unmistakable. The credentials were legitimate. The documentation was official. "But he doesn't look like," Evans started, then stopped as the full weight of what he'd done hit him. "Like what?" Turner demanded. "Like your idea of what a doctor should look like." Foster's phone buzzed again. Another text from the ICU. Rodriguez's blood pressure was now 70/30. "Critical range. Gentlemen, I appreciate the verification, but my patient is going into shock. We can sort this out after I've prevented a man from dying." Hayes nodded immediately. "Go, Dr. Foster. We'll handle this situation." Foster hurried toward Rodriguez's room, leaving behind the security guard whose assumptions had nearly cost a life. As he disappeared through the ICU doors, Coleman turned to Evans with undisguised contempt. "Do you realize what you almost did? Michael Rodriguez has 3 children. He's a construction worker who had a massive heart attack while building a playground for his community. Dr. Foster spent 4 hours yesterday saving his life, and you just prevented him from completing that work." Evans stood in the empty corridor, watching the best doctor in the hospital rush to save a patient whose life he'd endangered through nothing more than racist assumptions and stubborn pride. Turner pulled out his radio. "Security to administration office. We need to discuss immediate personnel changes." The most expensive security shift in Peter Evans' career was about to end. By 6 a.m., Peter Evans was unemployed. By 8 a.m., his termination had been reported to local news outlets. By noon, the story had gone viral across social media platforms nationwide. "Security guard prevents heart surgeon from treating patient" became the headline that destroyed one career while highlighting the excellence of another. Dr. Foster had spent the next 3 hours in emergency surgery, stabilizing Rodriguez and correcting the post-operative complications that could have been fatal if left untreated. Another hour. By dawn, Rodriguez was stable, conscious, and grateful to be alive. His family had been notified of both the medical emergency and the inexcusable delay in treatment. The hospital's legal department was in crisis mode by 7 a.m. Senior partners from the city's most prestigious law firms were already fielding calls from Rodriguez's family, from Dr. Foster's representatives, and from civil rights organizations who caught wind of the story. The potential liability was staggering. "How do we explain this?" asked Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's chief legal counsel, as she reviewed the overnight incident reports. "Our head of cardiothoracic surgery was prevented from treating a patient by a security guard with 3 months of training." Hospital CEO Margaret Chen sat at the head of the conference table, her expression grim as she read through the witness statements. 23 years of running Metropolitan General, and she'd never faced a situation this damaging to the hospital's reputation. "The security company is terminating Evans immediately," Chen said. "But that's not going to be enough. Dr. Foster is one of our most valuable physicians. The cardiac program he built generates $30 million annually in revenue. If he decides to take his skills elsewhere..." "It's worse than that," Walsh interrupted. "We could be looking at malpractice claims, civil rights violations, and regulatory investigations. The state health department has already called, asking for a full report." The media response was swift and merciless. Local television stations led with the story during morning newscasts. Social media exploded with outrage as hospital employees shared their own accounts of Dr. Foster's reputation and life-saving work. Medical professionals from across the country posted supportive messages, many sharing their own experiences with racial profiling in healthcare settings. Dr. Foster gave a single interview to the local NBC affiliate, his words measured but devastating in their simplicity. "I've dedicated my life to saving lives. Last night, a security guard decided that a black man in casual clothes couldn't possibly be a doctor, and his assumptions nearly cost Michael Rodriguez his life. This isn't about hurt feelings. This is about racial bias interfering with medical care." The interview went viral within hours. Medical schools shared it in diversity training seminars. Civil rights organizations used it as evidence of systemic racism in healthcare. Hospital administrators nationwide watched it and immediately reviewed their own security protocols. Peter Evans watched it from his apartment, unemployed and unemployable. His name and photograph had spread across social media alongside stories of his confrontation with one of the city's most respected physicians. Background check companies had already flagged his termination for racial profiling, making it nearly impossible to find work in security or any position requiring public trust. The security company that had employed Evans released a statement distancing themselves from his actions. "The behavior exhibited by former employee Peter Evans does not reflect our values or training standards. We have terminated his employment and are reviewing our hiring and training protocols." But Evans knew that no amount of corporate damage control would repair the destruction he'd caused to his own life. He confronted a man who'd saved over 2,000 lives and built a world-class cardiac program, all because he couldn't imagine that a black man in casual clothes could be a doctor. The lawsuit papers were served 3 days later. 18 months later, the settlement conference room at Morrison & Associates law firm was filled with tension thick enough to require surgical intervention. Dr. Vincent Foster sat calmly beside his attorney, reviewing the final settlement documents that would close one of the most expensive racial profiling cases in healthcare history. Across the table, Metropolitan General's legal team looked like they'd aged a decade during the litigation process. Hospital CEO Margaret Chen stared at the settlement figure with the expression of someone watching $38 million walk out the door, because that's exactly what was happening. $3.8 million, Foster's attorney announced, sliding the final documents across the polished conference table. Dr. Arcish's reputation, in emotional distress, potential future earnings lost due to trauma and stress, and punitive damages for the hospital's failure to properly train security personnel in medical emergency protocols. Chen signed the documents without comment. The alternative was a public trial that would have cost the hospital far more in reputation and revenue than any monetary settlement. Dr. Foster's case was airtight. His reputation was unassailable, and Peter Evans' actions were indefensible. Foster himself had mixed feelings about the victory. The money would be donated to medical scholarships for underrepresented students, but no amount of financial compensation could erase the memory of being prevented from saving a life because a security guard couldn't imagine a black doctor existed. "The most important part of this settlement isn't the money," Foster told the assembled lawyers. It's the systemic changes that ensure this never happens again. The reforms implemented at Metropolitan General became a national model for healthcare institutions. Every security employee now underwent comprehensive bias training before beginning work. Emergency medical protocols superseded all security concerns when verified medical staff identified themselves. Visual identification training included photographs and biographies of all department heads and senior physicians. Most significantly, the hospital implemented a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. Any security incident involving bias would result in immediate termination and blacklisting from future healthcare employment. Peter Evans had disappeared from public view entirely. His name remained permanently associated with one of the most high-profile cases of racial profiling in healthcare. Employment background checks revealed his termination for preventing medical care based on racial assumptions. He'd applied for over 200 jobs in the past 18 months and received 3 interviews, all ending when employers researched his history. His last known address was a studio apartment 40 miles outside the city, where he worked part-time at a fast food restaurant under a manager who didn't recognize his name from the news coverage. His dreams of a career in law enforcement or security had died the night he decided Dr. Foster looked too black to be a real doctor. Meanwhile, Dr. Foster continued saving lives with the same dedication that had made him legendary in the first place. Michael Rodriguez had recovered completely from his surgery and complications, returning to his construction work and coaching his children's soccer teams. He sent Dr. Foster a Christmas card every year with a simple message: "Thank you for saving my life despite what that man put you through." The cardiac program Foster had built continued to thrive, attracting patients from across the country who sought treatment from the surgeon whose skills had been validated not just by medical success, but by a justice system that recognized his value. Hospital revenue from cardiac procedures increased by 22% in the year following the settlement, as Foster's reputation for excellence was enhanced rather than diminished by his refusal to accept discriminatory treatment. Foster used his elevated platform to advocate for diversity in medical education and bias training in healthcare settings. He spoke at medical conferences about the intersection of racism and patient care, sharing research that showed how bias affected medical treatment quality and patient outcome. "What happened to me was about more than one security guard's assumptions," Foster explained during a keynote address at the American Medical Association's annual conference. "It was about a culture that teaches people to see black professionals as imposters until proven otherwise. In healthcare, those assumptions don't just hurt feelings, they can kill patients." The audience of medical professionals listened in silence, as Foster described the 37 minutes of delayed care that could have cost Michael Rodriguez his life, all because Peter Evans couldn't accept that medical expertise came in different colors than his expectations. Foster's story became required reading in medical school, diversity curricula nationwide. Nursing programs used his experience to train staff on recognizing and challenging bias in healthcare settings. Hospital administrators studied the case as an example of how racial profiling could expose institutions to massive liability. The changes extended beyond Metropolitan General. Healthcare systems across the country reviewed their security protocols and bias training programs. Professional medical organizations issued statements supporting physicians' rights to practice without racial harassment. State medical boards began tracking incidents of bias-related interference with medical care. But the most powerful change was cultural. Foster's case had demonstrated that excellence and expertise could overcome prejudice, that institutions could be held accountable for enabling discrimination, and that the cost of racial bias could be measured in millions of dollars in destroyed careers. Peter Evans learned that lesson too late to save his future, but just in time to serve as a warning to others who might mistake skin color for competence, assumptions for assessment, and prejudice for protection. And if you believe that excellence should be recognized regardless of race, that medical professionals deserve respect in their own institutions, and that racial bias has no place in healthcare, then make sure you subscribe.